Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 179. Are you getting by with a few fundamental commands for Git when building your Python projects? Would you like to improve your version control techniques and become more efficient with the Git command line? This week on the show, Adam Johnson is back to talk about his new book, Boost Your Git DX. Adam brings advice for creating a Git configuration, enabling autocorrect, and customizing a global ignore file. He researched through the cryptic documentation and found the valuable developer settings, so you won't have to. Adam also shares tools and settings to speed up your terminal workflows. We discuss configuring ZSH, creating aliases, and comparing diffs. We briefly dig into the most recent update to Django and his work on the project. This episode is brought to you by Taipy. If you're looking for an all-in-one solution for building and deploying web applications in Python, Taipy has you covered. With Taipy, you can easily make the front end, back end, and the deployment. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Adam, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was just over a year ago that we were talking about your previous book, and I'm excited to have you back on the show and learn what you've been up to in the last year or so.
Thank you. Yeah, it was start of 2022. I managed to get the last one out, and here we are approaching the end of 2023 with another one.
That's pretty good. So when did you actually start working on Boost Your Git DX?
It was after my son was born in November last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I had taken a break from client work, and I was, fighting to stay awake through the night, looking after him. So I was getting on the laptop whilst he slept on my chest, and I was thinking, what should I do? I watched a bit of TV, got bored of that, and I thought, I've written a few blog posts about Git recently. Perhaps there could be an opportunity for a book here in the same vein as the last one. And yeah, I found it.
Did you feel like there's a lot of areas for improving the developer experience there for Git?
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd one. I was reflecting on the time I'd spent pairing with people over the last few years, and I realized a good chunk of it was not the Python stuff or coding or Django or whatever. It was helping people get through Git command line. And I'd spot that, you don't have this one option set, and that's why you have to run something extra every time you run git push, for example. And then I reflected on this during this writing period, and I thought, I don't really know where I learned all this stuff. Like, it's very disparate sources. There's these hit tweets that come about every once in a while where someone shares one tweak you can make to your Git configuration, and then it gets 10,000 likes, and people are like, wow, that's amazing. Can't believe...
One magic trick.
Exactly.
That's funny.
I tried to just collect them all together into a book.
Cool. You mentioned pairing. So in that sort of pair programming, I'm guessing.
Yep.
And who's that with? Is that with clients, or is that through your work, or how's that coming up?
Yeah, with various clients that I've worked with over the last 4 years of my consulting work.
Okay.
I'd often be paired with a developer on a feature to advise on something particular or show them how to set something up that they hadn't done before. And was finding part of that was we need to figure out how to do the Git stuff.
Yeah, I think I mentioned before on the show, I was a trainer, worked at the Apple stores for a little while in kind of my weird journey of all the different things I've done in my life. And that would be one of the things I would do the first time I sat down with somebody to train with them. I would say, well, let me just watch you work for a little bit. And very often they just had gotten the new Macintosh computer. And one thing that Apple did that was really kind of weird for most users is they got rid of the button that was for the trackpad. And that confused people completely. They had no idea like how they were supposed to like do something like clicking drag. They would do like this weird crab crawl walk with one finger, then letting go and pushing another finger. And I'm like, you could just use your thumb. Like there was a button there. You can just hold it down like it's a button and then use a different finger to drag. And they were like, oh my God. It was like watching carpal tunnel, like manifest. So there's a lot of that. I agree that there's a lot you can learn just by watching somebody work just for a little while and, shave off those edges and definitely in the type of consulting I was doing, which was in recording studios and stuff like that. I would find people, okay, well, you got your microphone backwards. Let's work on that. And let's do, let's do, interesting little simple things that just like instantly made things simpler. So that's cool. So I guess it kind of gets us into a little bit about like why you decided to write this book. Were there other reasons you decided you wanted to write this one?
I would say that as I put these together, it was a bit like your example, but if Git is more like it's been designed in a user hostile way by accident.
Sure.
So like Apple, they changed the trackpad button just because it's nice, but Git has added all these kind of features that would help the user, but for backwards compatibility like being king. They'll never like turn something on by default or change something by default. So there may be 10 to 20 like top options that I think should be on by default, but they're not.
Yeah. And then even knowing, I would say the majority of users' experience to Git, this is an assumption, is they've been told to install it and you need to know these 3 commands and that's it. And then the other person walks away or the article stops talking about it because it doesn't want to be focused on Git, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's interesting.
I think that's definitely the situation for a lot of developers, and the Git docs don't help because they're inscrutable. Like they use like 4 or 5 different terms for the word commit. Oh. They use very low level terminology, and they could do with a pass through to make them a bit more accessible at this point.
Yeah. This is something you mentioned when you were on the episode of Django Chat, and that you had become a contributor. And I think that might be kind of interesting point because we're recording this in October. It's going to probably come out in the beginning of November, but this is a common month for people to get into contributing. And do you think that's something that they would be open to contributing to their documentation and hopefully, in a way improving it some?
Yes, I've found the Git community is very welcoming in general. It's just very hard to get involved because it doesn't use GitHub or anything. There's no pull requests to a fancy UI. It continues to use the email-based workflow that Git started with and was originally designed around.
Yeah, that needs some lessons right there, probably to to set up. I think you mentioned something about it had to be like pure text or pure HTML, no nothing fancy, which is pretty rare. Like everything's pretty much MIME today. Even Gmail, in a sense, the web version of it, it's got all the fancy bits in it. So
yeah. Well, the Git workflow continues to work for those core Git developers who do all of their email on the terminal as well as their Git.
There you go. Nice. So we talked a little bit about why and when. It's interesting because the intended audience, we kind of hitting them a little bit here, like people that literally are raising their hand right now going, me, I need help with this, other things. Who are other people that you could think of that would be a good audience for this book?
If you use command line Git on a daily basis is what I would say.
Okay.
So yeah, a lot of people use the Git GUI and that's brilliant. That works well for a lot of people. The command line is a preference for others. And I think you can only do the more advanced stuff with the command line. Like GUIs tend to not have buttons for everything.
Yeah.
That's fine. But if you like to use the command line Git, then look into this and you might pick up a few tips.
Okay, cool. I kind of have a question that's sort of a meta question that's about, you've now done 3 books, and we talked a lot about improving your Django developer experience, your Django DX. We didn't mention the first one a whole lot. What were some of the things that changed in the process, or did you develop some new techniques as you went in to write this book?
I feel like their muscle is a bit more developed of writing, going through the process, going from I've got an idea to I should draft out a table of contents to I should start expanding on the sections and seeing what fits and what doesn't, do a bit of research and realize that I would like the book to cover this stuff and not that stuff. That whole process, it feels a bit more refined now, which is nice. One nice addition that tooling wise is Grammarly on this book. So it found a lot of like small grammar improvements.
Sure.
So commas and hyphens and whatever that I realized actually I wasn't spelling things out in the clearest manner. So I hope that makes things a little bit more accessible, especially for folks who don't speak English as a first language.
Yeah. I have trouble sometimes with Grammarly, trying to figure out I write these intros for the podcast and I do a few other little things here and there. I still haven't quite figured out the voice thing, like what voice I want to write it in and so forth. Because sometimes the suggestions, like I really want it to be, I'm going to speak this thing, and that's not really a setting.
Yep.
So
I can imagine.
Were there settings that you finally became comfortable with in the suggestions and just ignored others?
I think I tweaked it a bit. I definitely had to add a lot of things to its dictionary, and I gradually adopted a slightly more formal tone for this book over the last two.
Yeah,
and I went through quite a lot of reader feedback as well on this one. So I did an early access. I have a system where you can send a suggestion at the end of each page, and readers actually tended to prefer this slightly less fun words in the text. Just tell me the facts and get on with it in the shortest amount of space. So I figured, okay, we'll go with it. I still keep up with like whimsical examples, so you won't see any boring examples about Foo Bar or
nice.
a bookstore. They'll all be Pokemon and whatever.
Yeah, that's always been a pet peeve of mine. Yeah, that's good. I was going to say, was that a new process of having people get an early access, and maybe did that help in navigating later chapters and stuff?
Totally helped a lot. I've received at least like 1,000 little bits of feedback from the people who worked with me on reading early editions and sending in their comments through this link that's still there in every chapter. So I hope to improve future updates.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was very helpful. And compared to the previous books where I thought, I just should have like 3 technical reviewers, which is kind of what O'Reilly does, or I should do 100 beta readers and then that should be enough. Like 100 beta readers, only 20 people actually replied, give or take. So getting early access readers in through the door really helped refine the text and figure out what's useful.
They have a vested interest too, I think, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I've already put some money into this thing.
Yeah, skin in the game.
Yeah, that's cool. Was there a specific thing that you were like, wow, this is the thing I'm most excited to share in this book?
The whole thing?
Sure.
It's split into 2 halves. The first half covers like quite a lot of global stuff you can do that will make general command line Git more enjoyable. And the second half dives into each of the specific commands like commit, add, reset, log, reflog, and more advanced commands. Being like, here's how to use it for the more advanced ones, and here are some options that you might want to enable that make it slightly more pleasant. Okay.
So, but pretty much right after the first chapter where you kind of just laying the groundwork of like what this book's about and so forth, your second chapter digs right into that global stuff like you mentioned. And I thought maybe we could talk about a few of the things that are in there. One of the things that I think a lot of people aren't aware of that I learned by just kind of reading about this is the idea that you can create a global ignore file, which I think is really pretty cool. It might save some effort on people's part. Maybe we could start with, what is a git ignore file?
Yeah, sure. A git ignore file is a series of patterns that tell Git to ignore certain files. It will never show them in Git status. It will never add them when you git add them, and you'll never commit them. So you might choose to ignore your IDE's directory.
Okay.
That is generated, like the .code directory that VS Code generates.
Sure.
I think it's called .code. And yeah, one pattern that I see newer developers using Git is that they'll come to a project, and they'll use their IDE, and their first commit in the project will be to ignore their IDE's directory in that project, because they'll be like, hey, now I joined the team, I need to make sure I don't commit these files that my IDE updates all the time.
Right.
The global ignore file would let you do that once and tell Git never in any project should you commit the .code directory, for example.
Yeah. Other common things that you would probably want to leave out might be platform specific, like the stuff for an operating system.
Yeah.
Like on a Mac, there's this kind of odd set of files, these .ds store files. Yeah.
I don't know what they do.
Right. Yeah. And they're hidden. So very often you're kind of unaware that they're getting committed or even copied in there. So that's a common one that, like, platform wise, you might say, hey, do this. And then depending on if you're a particular developer, then you might also think about, like, well, I only work on Python code, then I might choose some Python specific stuff. Like what would be in that list?
The list for Python, I'd say, is actually shrinking,
Okay.
which is an interesting thing we can talk about in a second. But yeah,
Sure.
For example, you might never want to commit your virtual env. So
Yeah.
.venv might be a pattern you add there. But that is where the list is shrinking. Several Python tools have started dropping their own git ignore direct file into their directory. So when you run PyTest, it has a cache directory.
Okay.
And now it puts for some time now, it puts a git ignore file in that cache directory that says entirely ignore this directory. So you run PyTest, it creates the directory, but Git will never see it. No one ever accidentally commits it. The virtual env package, which is like the original way of creating virtual environments, has for some time done the same thing. And Python 3.13 has just merged a feature, thanks to Brett Cannon, to do the same in the venv module. So,
okay.
Yeah, that should be the end of people pushing their virtual environments up to GitHub.
Yeah, at least make it a lot more rare.
A lot more rare, yeah.
Yeah, that takes up quite a bit of space, with all the different packages they're including in that environment and so forth. Yeah.
And it pollutes search results. Sometimes I'm searching for, like, is this feature in Django used? And then you find, like, there's 10,000 uses, and then you dig in and you're like,
ouch.
These are all the Django package just copied over and over again.
Yeah, I'm finding all this extra stuff. Would the PYC files be something there? The compiled files that are generated when you're okay.
Those are something you'd probably want in a per repository ignore, because every developer on your project will be generating those files and not wanting to commit them.
Okay. Yeah. So the concept there that's kind of unique then is that people may be used to the idea of having this, ignore file in their project folder so that they're making sure that they're not, committing it and sending it and so forth. But how's the global version of that work? How do you set that up?
So the modern way to do it is to have a .config directory in your home directory, and in that have a Git directory, and in that you can create an ignore file. It's just the plain name ignore.
Okay.
So it's .config/git/ignore. If you haven't used the .config directory for your Git config, you may have used the home directory /.gitconfig for your global Git config file. That's kind of the legacy way of doing it.
Oh, okay.
In the book, I'm promoting using the new .config directory. Okay. That's the kind of standard, doesn't pollute your home directory with like 4 or 5 different Git files.
All right. Yeah. Keep it all in the .config, which can hold a variety of other quote unquote configuration things for different applications or whatever.
Yeah. It's a standard. There are several standards really, because on Mac you might also have your library directory and whatever, but many tools use the home.config directory, and
cool.
That just keeps things tidy.
If you're looking for an all-in-one solution for building and deploying web applications in Python, Taipy has you covered. With Taipy, you can easily make the front end, back end, and the deployment. Forget learning advanced CSS and JavaScript. Instead, use a simple syntax to create multi-page dashboards and GUIs with only Python and augmented Markdown. Taipy is also designed to build powerful, customizable data-driven back-end applications. It provides components to organize and manage data through data flow orchestration and pipelines. Each pipeline execution is referred to as a scenario. Scenarios are stored, recorded, and actionable, enabling what-if analysis and KPI comparison. Taipy is designed to reduce your development time radically and provides all the functionalities you need to build and deploy entire applications. So what are you waiting for? Pip install Taipy. That's Taipy. So what are there other things that you want to mention that we could talk about that are sort of global stuff, Git-wise? One of the things I noticed was the idea of backing up your configurations.
Yeah, that's something that I find very important. Like, once you start putting a bit of effort into configuring any tool, it's a really good idea to back up those files so that if your laptop dies, if you need to move to another one, or if you're setting up a server that you want to work the same, you can download those files from your backup.
Okay.
And a Git repo is a perfect way to back them up.
Except for you wouldn't have the ignore this time. Or whatever, you have these different files that are put
Until you set it up, yes, Git will work differently, but hopefully that's just a couple commands.
Oh yeah, so that you feel like that's a common place to store it, is to just put it along with your other stuff? Okay.
I recommend an easy way of doing it, which is create a repository and then put the files in there and use symlinks in the real paths. So you might have a repository that has a Git directory with an ignore file, and then in the real .config Git directory, there's a symlink, and you can actually write a very short shell script that sets those up.
Okay.
There are more advanced tools that do these symlinks for you or can track files automatically, but I find just doing it the vanilla way is probably the first step you'd want to take to backing up your configuration.
Nice. I feel like we hit quite a few things in the global sort of chapter. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I don't know if you kind of explored this and found it on your own, but that I find fascinating, and it's a common problem that I have typing in the terminal, is autocorrect and needing some kind of version of that. I don't know how. There's a handful of words I'm always just. It's like a form of. I know it's just typos, but it feels like you're just inverting letters all the time, just trying to be rapid about like typing a common command. So what is this sort of autocorrect thing that you were covering in one of your chapters?
Oh yeah, so Git has an autocorrect system. If you type Git and then a command name that is misspelled, like commit with one M,
right,
then it's already enabled in some form, in that it will tell you, hey, you typed commit. That's not a real word. Did you mean commit?
Yeah.
But then the command dies. And there are other options for the autocorrect system to have it continue automatically to the match if there is a single good match.
Okay.
Or to ask you, hey, did you mean commit? And then you just type Y, enter, and it'll continue.
Okay, so there's three options there. One, it just says, it looks like you typed the wrong word. You might have meant this word. We're done.
Yeah.
The one of them, it's automatically going forward and saying, oh, I think you mean this word, and I'm going to go ahead and you actually start to see the command run.
Yep.
Okay. And then the third, it actually gives you the yes, no kind of like. All right, cool. Is that across a handful of other commands that works, or is it relegated to just like commit?
This is all the commands that Git knows about.
Okay.
So you type git add or whatever. If you make a typo, it will autocorrect. I like using the immediate mode, by the way. So just fly by the seat of your pants and be like,
oh, you do? You just like go for it.
Yeah. There's very few things that like you can't undo if you don't know how. So
okay. Do you get into a lot of that? Like that we were talking offline before we started that we both were familiar with a book called Oh Shit Git, which is Julie Evans' zine, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I think she partners with somebody else on it. I'll include a link for it. But that book, to me, the focus of it is when Git has gone wrong and how to kind of recover and a variety of recovery states. Is that something that you get into there? And I'm guessing there's a handful of those kinds of things. I'm not sure if that delves too deep into the developer experience, but obviously making mistakes is a common thing that you're going to want to come back from. Not only mistakes, but just like, bad choices.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, mistakes are necessary to make progress, really.
Sure.
If you're not making any mistakes, they're going too slowly.
Yeah, I guess that might be true.
Yeah, the key command for undoing pretty much anything in Git is called reflog. It's like a meta log. So Git log shows you the log of commits. The reflog shows you the log of how you changed those commits. So if you look at the reflog for a branch, it will show you every time you committed, but also every time you rebased, every time you did commit -- amend, or every time you ran reset and threw away commits. So in the reflog chapter, I kind of explain a bit about how it works and then a few scenarios that you can undo by using the reflog. It has a lot of overlap there with the Oh Shit Git style of how to undo.
Yeah.
I think I was aiming to be like a little bit more in depth of like, this is the reflog. And if you go through these few scenarios and understand it, you should be able to undo other kinds of novel mistakes that you might manage to make.
Oh, look, you found something new. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have an example of a gnarly problem like that you've used reflog to help kind of untangle?
Yeah. I mean, even after writing the chapter on reflog, I found myself being like a little bit more confident of doing things without abandon and being like, I can recover this with the reflog. Like, I've cemented that knowledge now. Like,
right.
Previously, it was like a handful of Stack Overflow posts that I've found over the years that have been like, I know that you can undo this. How do I undo it? So yeah, I've used a lot of rebasing now, and I've been like, well, I'll just try a rebase and throw away these commits and see if the tests still pass. And then if they don't, then I know I can undo the rebase.
Okay. So there's a variety of these like little steps or escalation steps that you can take depending on how deep of a surgery you want to commit.
Exactly.
To stuff. Okay. All right. Cool. It sounds like you kind of get into a variety of those across there.
Yep.
One thing that you were talking about in one of the later chapters is kind of more leaning toward a terminal side of things, of, even maybe moving beyond typos and having an autocorrect is like, oh, I do these commands so often, maybe I want to have an alias for these things. And that's something that's outside of Git at that point. So it's a kind of a nice developer tool. And you were setting it up for a specific terminal. Was it ZSH or ZSH, as you guys like to say?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Oh My ZSH, which is a project for enhancing ZSH. I think a lot of us are using ZSH now, especially since macOS made it the default.
Yeah, the M1 Max and latest stuff seems to be all kind of like, sorry, we're moving beyond Bash. I think you can still get it, but yeah.
Yeah, I think most people set up a new laptop or wherever they get ZSH and they maybe don't even realize to begin with. But
here you are.
Here you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And whether or not you're using Bash or ZSH or something else, I think the aliases that Oh My ZSH has developed and refined over a decade now of development, they're a pretty good set of Git aliases to copy in. Maybe you adjust some and add your own, but they're good. And I tell you about setting this up in the book.
Okay, you talk about setting it up?
Yep.
Okay.
Talk about setting it up.
Is it a more of a, this is like sort of toggles inside of Oh My ZSH, or is it like an all or nothing kind of thing? Like how committed are you as far as like saying, I want to add, all these different sort of quick aliases?
Yeah, It acts as a plugin inside of OMyZSH.
Okay.
And the plugin is on by default. So everyone who installs OMyZSH gets these Git aliases.
Okay, they're ready to go.
Yeah. And you could copy paste them into your own config if you don't want to use OMyZSH. They're, at the end of the day, aliases are pretty cheap. So
Yeah.
adding a bunch into your spaces is not that bad. You can always unalias them or unalias the ones you don't like.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Is that a recent turn for you, or is that something you've used for a long time?
I've used it for a long time. I used another project called zpresdo for a bit in between, but I moved back to OMyZSH because it's way more maintained and popular.
Okay. I have this experience where I've not necessarily pair programmed, but like talked with other developers, and then you see their setup and you just sort of like, okay, what is the sort of spacecraft cockpit they've made their terminal into that I don't understand what they're doing? Do you feel like you've done that throughout this, or is it you feel like somebody walking up to your terminal could just be able to, type the normal commands that they know without it being like this super highly configured type of beast?
I've done a bit of that in the past, and then as I feel like I've matured as a developer, I've come back and be like, I don't need something so custom.
Uh-huh.
I don't need something that's so inscrutable. So I use OMyZSH, which is pretty widely used. And if you didn't know about the aliases, you could use the normal commands.
Right.
I use Starship as the prompt, which is a nice little project that's come out that's like a cross-shell prompt, has a specific default style that's really good for everyone, including like Git details. And there's really no need to configure it. So nearly everyone who uses Starship uses that default theme.
Okay.
And so
just
I hope it'd look the same.
Install the theme and you're ready to go.
The only problem you'd find walking up to my computer is that I use the Colemak keyboard layout. So you probably wouldn't know that.
The what?
The Colemak keyboard layout.
Oh, okay. Is that outside of the standard QWERTY? Is that like a different type of thing?
It's the third most popular after QWERTY and Dvorak.
Dvorak. Oh, God. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. When did you change that?
Like 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago.
And that was just like, I really want to, it helps you type faster, or it's more wrapped around with the way you think, or I really wanted a challenge. Why did you go there?
I really wanted to avoid RSI. I was thinking, I'm going to be a professional programmer. I don't want to get RSI.
And the Colemak layout is much less of that as far as like where stuff is. Like what's the advantage?
It's an estimated half as much movement of your fingers for average typing of English.
Okay. Are all the funky, I say funky, but all the, punctuation and types of things that you use in programming, are they still kind of on the outer edges, or are they easier to get to also?
They are still on the outer edges. It's not like Dvorak that puts loads of punctuation under the right hand, I think. It's a bit closer to QWERTY. It tries to move fewer letters. Yeah.
How's that spelled? Colemak?
Colemak.
All right. I got to look at that. Just see what it is. When you did that, like I know I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but did you use like a typing tutor or some other kind of way to kind of retrain your brain, or you just, and has it always been an external keyboard then? Like I'm guessing you can't, get a configured keyboard typically with it, unless you're like popping key caps off or something.
You can pop the keycaps off. I broke my first MacBook slightly doing that. Like one of the keys still like flapped around a bit, but thankfully it was like a less typed leather.
Okay.
Yeah, an external keyboard is the way there.
Okay. Are you a keyboard snob? You have a big clicky keyboard?
Not clicky. My co-worker / wife would not tolerate that.
Yeah, the baby wouldn't enjoy it either, I guess.
I think he'd love it, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Those are fun to play. Well, I thought maybe we could kind of dig into, we mentioned a couple of tools here of OMyZSH and Starship. Are there additional, like, I guess, sort of easy wins that you can think of that someone who's looking to improve their developer experience that you can throw out there that either is like a third-party tool or maybe just something that they're just not typically configuring?
I'd like to highlight one of the things in Git that really I think should be the default.
Okay.
From what I've seen. When you're looking at a diff, Git actually generates that live from the old snapshot and the new snapshot. It doesn't store diffs despite what it might look like. Every time you're looking at the log, it's generating that diff by looking at the old file, the new file, and aligning the lines.
Okay.
And
it's just live.
Even though it might not seem like it, every time we look at a commit, it's a diff, but actually that's generated by an algorithm that defaults to something called Myers, which is like quite a simple algorithm for aligning which lines have changed and which lines haven't between the two versions of the file.
Okay.
But there's a better algorithm that's been in Git for like a long while now called histogram.
Huh.
And that's based on a mathematical histogram of counting like the types of lines there are. That helps align things, especially when there's repeating characters like braces. So if a brace line is trying to be aligned, that's a very common line, especially a closing brace in a bracey language. There might be like hundreds of lines that are closing braces.
Yeah.
So it will not try and align those. It'll try and align the unique lines first. And that can really improve readability of diffs when like a few such blocks have moved around.
Okay. Is that a fairly easy configuration change to do?
Yep. You just set the setting diff.algorithm to histogram.
Okay.
And everything will look better. I think GitHub and other code hosting sites might use it by default. So you might notice that diffs look better on GitHub than they do on the command line.
Or maybe you have noticed it and wondered what the heck that was.
Or you were just staring at it on the command line. Like, I cannot see what the heck changed in this commit. Let me go check the pull request on GitHub, and then it seems clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if somebody's looking to do that, where would they be searching? Would they be like, okay, I'm looking to change my diff algorithm?
You need one command, which is git config -- global.
Okay.
diff.algorithm histogram.
All right. That's the whole thing.
That'll pop it into your global configuration file. Yep.
Nice. So this global configuration file, we've mentioned a handful of things already that would land in there, like the autocorrect that gets to be part of that also, right? What are other things that land in the configuration file that you can think of on top of your head?
Yeah, there's pretty much something for every major command that I recommend in the book.
Okay.
Maybe not for like commit. No, there is one for commit.
Okay.
You know, probably for most commands, there is something that I would say it should be the default in Git. It isn't. So, hey, we're going to have to switch it on if we want to enjoy that slightly improved experience.
So something that is, I don't know, quote unquote nice in like a IDE, touring its settings file is very often you can kind of just peruse it, if you will, and just sort of like look through it and see, well, what are all the options? I feel like that's not the case here in this global configuration file. I feel like it would be fairly empty initially. Am I wrong about that? Like you can't just go look through it and go, wow, maybe I should toggle that thing on or toggle it off. I feel like it's something that literally is getting added to the file, like a git ignore.
Yeah. This file starts empty. You would, if you run one of these git config global commands, it will create it.
Okay.
And that'll be that. You can go read the Git docs page on git config, which lists all the options.
Yeah.
I've done it and I don't recommend it.
You've done the work for them to highlight what's nice about it.
I think there might be like 1,000 options.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe more if you count all these like variants.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the thing with the docs. Like they've grown organically since Git's creation in 2005, and every new option is on there.
Okay.
It's great that everything is documented,
yeah.
but it's a reference. It's not for the end user.
Yeah, it's interesting.
A bunch are experimental or super niche, like very, very niche. Like you only want this if you're running a Git server. And like there are a handful of companies running very large Git servers, that kind of thing.
Yeah. This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. It's definitely connected to our main topic this week. Have you ever worked on a Python project that stopped working after you made a change here or a pep8 cleanup there, and you weren't quite sure how to get it back? Version control systems can help you solve that problem and other related ones. This video course is titled Introduction to Git and GitHub for Python Developers. It's based on a real Python tutorial by previous guest Jim Anderson. And in the video course, real Python instructor Paul Mealis takes you through what is Git and how to use it for your personal projects, how to use it in conjunction with GitHub to work with other people on larger projects, how to create a repo, how to add both new and modified files, common Git commands like status, add, commit, pull, push, and more, and how to navigate through your project's history so you can get back to when your project was working. Git is one of the most popular version control systems today. I think it's a worthy investment of your time to dig into the fundamentals of Git and using GitHub as a Python developer. Like most of the video courses on Real Python, this course is broken into easily consumable sections. It has a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the search tool on realpython.com. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that sort of history, if you're comfortable talking about it. I don't know
sure.
if you do that at all in the book, like kind of where this idea of Git kind of came from. And I'm intrigued by what you're saying here. It sounds like as a project, generally things just seem to kind of get bolted on in some ways, and things just kind of added. I don't know if they've ever like refactored the whole thing and tried to streamline it at all, but kind of the way you're explaining things, it feels like these are, it's like, don't look under the hood kind of thing. So maybe we can just cover a little bit of the history for people who aren't familiar.
Yeah, so Git was created by Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, for tracking the Linux project. In 2005, he created it, and I believe it was 2009 that he stepped down as the lead maintainer of Git and handed it over to Junio Hermano, who's done the work since. So that's like a real stalwart of open source, like a long time making Git.
Yeah.
From before GitHub to now, it must have changed so much as a project. Yeah, my impression from like listening to Git podcasts, reading Git posts from core developers and the mailing list a little bit is that, it's a kind of classic open source anarchic project. If you turn up with a change that you want in and you manage to get it into a good enough shape, it gets in and gets merged.
All right.
There's definitely a idea that it should work for everyone, and let's add everything that everyone wants, which is great for like the underlying tool, but for something that people are using day to day, the 90% of us who just want to commit and push something into the repo for others to see.
Yeah.
There's not a curation then of the options and whatever to see.
Yeah. There's no overarching board. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. You mentioned Git podcasts. I wasn't familiar. I of course, there's a podcast about that. There's how many podcasts about Python out there. So it's kind of amazing. Was that part of your journey diving into this book? Like, let me see what all the different resources are out there.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't think that there were Git podcasts actually when I started out. And I found two, which are Git Notes and the Git Podcast, something like that.
Okay.
They're both defunct for a few years now.
Okay.
So
that's the things come and go. Technology stuff. It's pretty. The energy level has to take a lot to sustain. Going past like even 50 or more than that episodes. Are there any other like extra tools that you want to shine a light on as we kind of wrap up some of the secrets that we're sharing? Because there's a ton in the book. I somebody should just go and read the table of contents, because it will give you a really good outline of like what is in there. And there's just a ton of great features in there. I'm very excited to dig into it myself. But is there another like little tool you'd want to share?
Let's squeeze one in. I'd say Delta.
Okay.
Git has a pluggable system for the formatting of diffs on the command line. Well, not just diffs, like more of its output, basically. Mostly the diffs, but other stuff as well, like blame output. And Delta is one such tool that can plug in. It's like a newer one built in Rust by someone from Twitter.
Okay.
And it's really nice. It does syntax highlighting of the code. So it looks a lot more like what you'd see on the GitHub UI. So you're looking at the code and then which lines have added are highlighted in green as background and which ones have been removed have a red background.
Okay.
So it lets you really skim through like what's changed a lot better. And I think it's what makes the command line experience a lot more comfortable for me.
Nice. You actually created a little tool, speaking of sort of color highlighting.
Yes.
That is now one of your many projects that you maintain. We'll include a link to it because we mentioned quite a few when we were discussing the Django developer experience book. You had a whole bunch of them, like, I don't know, maybe you mentioned like 4 or 5 of them, but you created one for this particular project. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's called pygments-git. Pygments is the Python-based formatter, highlighter for code that is used pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
GitHub used to use it, but now they use a Ruby fork. And many other tools use pigments like the Python docs and anything else that uses Sphinx. I was finding that my Git output was a bit dry to read because there's some color to Git's output on the command line. It's not very, very pretty, but it's there and it helps its readability. And plain text in the book wasn't helping with that. So I tried to write a pigments plugin that adds some Git formatters that add that highlighting back in.
Okay. Would somebody who's not looking to do screen grabs find it useful just to kind of prettify what they're doing inside their terminal?
If you're blogging about Git, it might come in handy. I'm using it on my blog and in the book, and I don't know if anyone else is using it. So
well, now they know.
Check it out.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I have these weekly questions I like to ask everybody, and you suggested an additional one, which I think is really good. I normally ask, what are you excited about in the world of Python? We can get to that, but let's start with what are you excited about in the world of Git?
I'd say a couple things. One is the future of Git, which I feel like is maybe going to be a Git compatible tool. So a nicer front end that works for the majority of us who are just doing our day-to-day dev work.
Okay.
There are a couple out there that we will see if they get adoption. One is called Sapling, that's made by Facebook/Meta, and one is called Jujitsu, that's a slightly less developed, but has an interesting approach.
Are they, you say a front end, are they like a GUI kind of a graphical type of thing or something else?
No, command line front end.
Oh, command line. Okay.
So you're no longer typing git commit, you're typing, I think it's SP for Sapling, for example, and then a command.
Okay.
And they have more modernized command line output, prettier stuff. It looks a bit more like the Rust compiler or whatever we want to say as a pretty command line thing these days.
Yeah.
And some opinions, like I think Sapling, when you look at the log, by default, it doesn't show anyone else's commits. It's like, well, you probably only care about the things you're working on. So we'll just do ... for everyone else's stuff.
Okay. So that's giving you a lot more configured, opinionated feedback on what you just did. It's providing the stuff, and that is helping with the experience.
And trying to simplify this experience. Like, do you really need to git add things before you commit, or could it just be you run commit and by default that puts all the changed things in?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So it's potentially assisting with multiple steps in that process.
Yep.
Okay. Nice. Do you have a favorite out of the two, or are you picky?
I can't say I've looked into either enough to have an opinion.
Okay.
I do think the Git command line will be around for quite a while, regardless of if something seems to be more popular, because there's so many tutorials out there telling you how to use Git.
Oh, yeah. What are you excited about in the world of Python right now?
Django 5.0 comes out in December.
Okay.
It's a feature-packed release. There's a lot of goodies in there for us Django nauts. It's got database level defaults and generated fields. They're probably my two favorite features there.
Cool.
So really going to simplify database management with Django.
Nice. Yeah, we were just mentioning the feature freeze and the alpha release. So yeah, it feels like the numbers are ramping up so fast, but I guess I'm way deeper in Python lately. But like when I was starting, I don't know, 5 years ago, I felt like, Django 1 point whatever forever. It just kept going. And then like suddenly it was like 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's like, I mean, I guess it's similar in the sense that Python's, changed to a yearly cadence, which has been interesting too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the long-term release would be for 5 then? Would be like just after 5.0?
Django has a specific release policy of it's always a new major version, 0.0, 0.1, and then 0.2 is the LTS.
Okay.
And then it ticks over to the new major version. The new major version doesn't really indicate this is a big one with a bunch of features that are going to break your stuff. It's like, hey, there's a new cycle, and we might a bit more experimental stuff in the 0.0.
Yeah.
And then the 0.2, everything's fixed for the long-term cycle.
So, I mean, maybe we could just talk about it briefly, but you've been a contributor for a while. Do you want to talk about your history working on the Django project?
Yeah, sure. I've worked with Django since 2012. I started contributing in 2014, just some minor things and some third-party package stuff.
Okay.
And then a couple years later, I was invited into what was then called core team. And since then, I've just continued contributing. Had some jobs where I didn't do so much, and that wasn't so much fun. So I decided to start on my own as like a Django-based consultant, and that's given me a lot of opportunities to feed back into Django and the wider community.
Yeah, I bet a lot of stuff comes up in the process. It's been interesting kind of watching the Django community. Like right now, literally as we're recording, and this will be past when it comes out, the current Django Con is happening, and you were just sort of lamenting not being able to go this year. How often have you been able to go to the conference?
I've only ever been to DjangoCon Europe.
Oh, okay.
This is DjangoCon US that's on right now.
Yeah.
I set myself like a goal in 2020, just as it started. I was like, I'm going to all 3 Django cons that will be on this year: Europe, US, and Africa.
Wow.
And that was 2020, so that didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about DjangoCon Europe. I had a few people on, and the stuff that was supposed to happen in Porto, and then it got moved. And yeah, that was quite the challenge. I had those guys on. But yeah, eventually it happened. Mm-hmm. You're back in Europe.
Yep.
So,
and DjangoCon Africa was delayed, and this will be the first year it actually happens.
Oh, okay.
On the 6th of November. Yep.
Okay, nice.
So that will be exciting to see. Yep.
Well, we'll include a link for that. So what's something that you want to learn next? Again, this doesn't have to be programming or Python specific. It could be just something that you want to learn about.
Well, one thing after writing 2 books with the same kind of title pattern, Boost Your DX. I'm like, should I just keep going?
Yeah.
I use a lot of ZSH. Should I try and figure out all of the most useful patterns and some of these ZSH tricky word, ZSH specific features?
Yeah.
That people might not be aware of, like the Z move command that does like templated copy paste, templated moving.
You're definitely in the era where it's becoming more prevalent. So
yes, indeed.
Yeah.
But maybe I'll just take a break on writing for the time being.
Okay. Take a little rest.
Takes a little bit out of me. Just do some blogging whenever I feel like it.
Yeah. We'll definitely talk about that. In fact, how can people follow the work that you do online? Mm-hmm. Your blog would be the first place, right?
Yes. adamj.eu is my blog. Even though the UK has left the EU, I still have a .eu domain.
Yeah.
And I'm also on Mastodon at adamchains with a Z at fostodon.org, and the same username on Twitter at adamchains.
Nice. In our PyCoders episodes with Christopher Trudeau and myself, mm-hmm. we definitely have featured a few things from your writings on there. So I appreciate the blog. There's a lot of really good stuff on there. There's a bunch of stuff on Git. If you want to get kind of a preview of some of the stuff from the book, that there's definitely a handful of things on there. I totally suggest people check it out. Or if you're a Django person, there's a wealth of information there, and maybe eventually ZSH stuff as you start to work it out. Yeah. Have there been any other interesting things that you had blogged about recently outside of Git?
I've just been too focused on this for the last small
that
periods.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I've got a few things I've worked on client projects with Django that I'd like to turn into posts.
Yeah. I guess that is always kind of a fertile ground, working on stuff out there in the field and coming back and saying, "Oh, I could write about this." Give you lots of ideas.
Especially people tend to ask me the most interesting questions.
All right. Well, Adam, thanks again for coming on the show, and I'm excited to share your new book with our audience here. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
And don't forget, Taipy is designed to reduce your development time radically and provides all the functionalities you need to build and deploy entire applications. So what are you waiting for? Pip install Taipy. That's Taipy. I want to thank Adam Johnson for coming on the show again this week. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python Podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python Podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and I look forward to talking to you soon.